The grand civic ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, but the room belonged to Mayor Sterling in a black evening gown and a heavy gold mayor's necklace. She stood beneath the live television cameras, like the city itself had been built to reflect her light. Wealthy donors smiled, waiters drifted, and every polished surface seemed to shine for her. Then her smile slipped. She leaned away from the microphone and hissed toward her chief of staff. "Where is the envelope?" "The transfer from the vault is delayed." His face tightened. He gave one frantic shake of his head and disappeared through the side door. Whatever had gone wrong backstage, it was bad enough to make the most powerful woman in the room look afraid. Near the velvet-lined VIP hallway, Marcus kept polishing the brass railings, his worn ring of janitor's keys jingling softly at his belt. Donors brushed past him without a glance. To them, he was just another invisible worker in a room built for important people. Before that broadcast was Osaver's, Mayor Sterling's would turn this entire ballroom against the wrong man. Just outside the VIP hallway, Marcus continued his routine, as if the room's mounting panic meant nothing to him. His dark blue uniform hung loose on his broad shoulders, a sharp contrast to the tailored elegance surrounding him. He had worked at the school for 9 years. Maintenance, repairs, a quiet presence in spaces where his presence was barely acknowledged. The charity gala was just another event where his job was to keep the brass polished and stay out of sight. He watched the chief of staff hurry past, his face tight with urgency. Marcus had seen the man before: nervous exchanges, late-night vault access, careful movements through restricted corridors. Details most people wouldn't notice, details that added up. The worn ring of keys at his hip jingled softly as he resumed polishing. To anyone watching, Marcus was just another service worker, invisible in a room built to ignore him, but his composure never wavered. His breathing stayed steady. His hand remained calm on the brass railing. Around him, the gala's energy shifted. Something had gone wrong. Marcus could feel it. In the way the donors' conversations became urgent whispers, in the way the mayor's voice had changed behind the microphone. He kept polishing. He kept watching. He kept his hand near the keys at his hip. Whatever was about to happen, he was ready for it. 10 minutes later, the carefully maintained equilibrium of the gala shattered. A woman's voice rose from the VIP section, sharp, urgent. Someone had discovered the missing envelope, the $100,000 centerpiece of the televised presentation, the donation that was supposed to be ceremonially presented to the cameras, was gone from the administrative vault. The live orchestra's music faltered as donors began whispering urgently to one another. The broadcast crew's director was suddenly barking orders into his headset. Up on the stage, Mayor Sterling's face, drained of color, her hand gripped the microphone stand so hard her knuckles went white. She scanned the ballroom frantically. Her eyes darted toward the administrative corridor, then back to the crowd. The panic in her expression was raw and unguarded for just a moment. A moment the live cameras caught and would broadcast to millions. She needed someone to blame. She needed it now. She needed the narrative to shift before anyone asked the questions she couldn't answer. Her desperate gaze swept across the room, past the donors, past the catering staff, past the security guards at the exits. Then she saw him. Marcus stood alone near the velvet ropes, still holding his polishing rag. His worn ring of keys hung prominently from his belt, the only service worker visible in the high-security perimeter. To the mayor, he must have looked like opportunity. Sterling's panic crystallized into calculation. Her expression hardened from fear into something darker, predatory certainty. She had found her scapegoat. Mayor Sterling abandoned the podium. She moved across the ballroom floor with the controlled fury of someone who had just made a decision that felt absolutely necessary. Her black gown caught the light as she walked. The heavy gold mayor's necklace swung slightly against her collarbone, a symbol of authority that had commanded this city for years. She snapped her fingers at the TV director. "Follow me," she mouthed. The camera boom swung instantly, hungry for conflict. The live broadcast cut to a wide shot of the mayor marching toward Marcus, her face flushed with red-faced fury. The gala crowd fell silent. Everyone could sense what was about to happen. "You're a thief," Sterling's voice echoed off the marble walls. She stopped 3 feet from Marcus, her finger pointed directly at his chest. The accusation hung in the live broadcast, carried by satellite across the state into millions of homes, undeniable and public. "Don't play dumb," she spat, ensuring the boom mic caught every word. Her voice was contemptuous, designed to strip dignity. "He has the master keys. He's the only one here with unchecked access to the donor vault." The gala crowd gasped collectively. Several donors physically stepped backward, creating distance between themselves and Marcus, as if accusation itself was contagious. Marcus didn't raise his hands. He didn't step back. He simply stopped moving and looked directly at Mayor Sterling. His eyes met hers with a composure that seemed to surprise her, a calmness that belonged in a different kind of conversation than the one she was having. In the foreground of the camera lens, catching the harsh glare of the TV lighting, his worn ring of keys rested steadily on his hip. Within seconds, the machinery of institutional power moved into place. 2 massive security guards shoved their way through the crowd, flanking Marcus on both sides. Their body language was aggressive, their hands hovering near holsters. They treated him as guilty on the mayor's word alone. No evidence needed, no investigation required. Accusation was enough. The wealthy donors physically backed away, clutching their designer purses and phones. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Harsh, immediate judgments. I always wondered about people like that. What was security thinking? Of course he took it. Look at him. Off to the side, the TV director pressed his headset tighter against his ear. "Stay tight on the janitor's face," he muttered to his cameraman. "Don't cut away. This is great TV. The cameras loved public humiliation. The cameras always did." Emboldened by the presence of security and the cameras and the weight of public judgment, Mayor Sterling stepped closer to Marcus. She looked down at him with an expression designed to strip away every ounce of human dignity. "Surrender those keys right now," she demanded, her voice pitched to carry across the room. "And empty your pockets. Right there on the ballroom floor, show everyone what you stole." Her gold necklace caught the light as she gestured, the symbol of her authority gleaming and untouchable. Through the suffocating tension, Marcus didn't flinch. His face remained an impenetrable mask. Instead of reaching into his pockets, he slowly lowered his right hand and placed it firmly over the worn key ring on his belt. He did not say a single word, and he did not hand them over. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background noise of the gala seemed to pause, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The cameras caught everything. The mayor's fury, the security guard's readiness, the crowd's judgment, and Marcus's unbroken composure. In that moment, something shifted. Not visibly, not yet, but in the subtlest way, the energy of the room had changed. The mayor had expected fear. She had expected compliance. She had expected a working-class black man to crumble under public accusation and institutional power. Instead, she got stone-cold silence. For a long, agonizing moment, the ballroom was dead silent. The security guards stood rigid on either side of Marcus. The crowd held its breath. The cameras kept rolling. Sterling's finger remained pointed at Marcus's chest, but something had shifted in her eyes. A flicker of uncertainty, as if she'd just realized she might have miscalculated. Then Marcus spoke. For the first time all evening, his voice cut through the silence. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He didn't defend himself with emotion or desperation. He simply looked directly at Mayor Sterling, his deep, steady voice carrying effortlessly into the boom mic, hovering above them. "If I used these keys to open the vault," Marcus asked, holding up the worn brass ring so the cameras could see it clearly, "why is the vault's digital biometric log showing it was opened 20 minutes ago by your fingerprint?" The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Mayor Sterling's face went blank. The furious, righteous fire in her eyes vanished in an instant, replaced by naked, staring terror. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, stammering sound came out. Her hand dropped from the accusing point. The gold mayor's necklace seemed to suddenly weigh heavily against her collarbone. The flawless facade of her authority, the control she'd maintained for years, the power she'd wielded so confidently just moments before, cracked right there on national television, in front of millions of viewers. Marcus let the heavy brass keys drop back against his hip, the low-tech metal a glaring contrast to her high-tech crime. He had said exactly one sentence. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. He had simply told the truth, and the room knew it. The silence in the ballroom shattered into 100 furious whispers. The donors who had been glaring at Marcus just moments before suddenly turned their gaze onto the mayor. Eyes narrowed, phones were raised, some recording, some texting, some already searching for context online. The suspicion in the room was palpable and suffocating, a visible recalibration of every assumption made in the last 5 minutes. Mayor Sterling's voice rose, but it was no longer commanding. It was panicked. "Cut the feed," she shrieked, her voice pitching into a shrill that made several donors physically flinch. She spun toward the TV director, desperation in every movement. "Turn those cameras off right now. This is a malfunction. Cut to commercial." Off to the side, the TV director stood with his arms crossed. Staring her down, he pressed his headset's mic firmly. "Keep rolling," he ordered his cameraman. His voice was calm, professional, and absolutely unmoved by the mayor's command. "Do not drop that shot. This is the story of the year." Sterling was visibly sweating now. Her carefully styled hair clung to her forehead. The makeup that had been flawless at the beginning of the broadcast was beginning to crack under the heat of the lights and the weight of public scrutiny. She looked from the director to the cameras to the crowd, searching desperately for the deference and adoration she had commanded just 10 minutes prior. But the crowd was physically stepping away from her. The donors weren't moving closer to offer support. They were creating distance, subtle but unmistakable. Her total control over the city's elite was evaporating in real time, visible to everyone in the room and to millions watching at home. The mayor was no longer in control of the narrative, and she knew it. Trapped and desperate, Mayor Sterling did something that would become the most replayed moment of the broadcast. She lunged. She reached out with clawed fingers, trying to physically snatch the key ring right off Marcus's belt. It was a gesture of pure panic, an attempt to silence him, to reclaim control through force, to erase the one piece of evidence that had just destroyed her credibility. "The logs are broken," she screamed, her voice raw and unhinged. "He's a liar. He's a desperate, thieving liar trying to save his own skin." Marcus didn't even blink. He simply took one smooth, measured stepward. The movement was unhurried, controlled, almost lazy. The mayor grasped at empty air where he had been standing just a moment before, her momentum carrying her forward in an awkward lurch. She stumbled, her elegant black gown catching under her heel. For a moment, the most powerful woman in the city looked utterly unhinged. A red-faced, frantic politician flailing at a perfectly composed janitor who refused to break, refused to panic, refused to match her desperation with desperation of his own. The crowd gasped. Some donors turned away. Others pulled out their phones to record the moment. The cameras caught everything. Humiliated, her last attempt at physical control having failed, Sterling spun toward her chief of staff, who was standing frozen near the edge of the crowd. "Call the police," she roared, pointing a trembling finger at him. "Get them in here right now. I want him arrested for grand larceny and defamation. Do it now." Her voice cracked on the final word. Minutes later, the heavy ballroom doors burst open. 4 uniformed police officers rushed into the VIP perimeter, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. They moved with the controlled efficiency of people responding to an emergency call. Professional, alert, ready for conflict. The moment they arrived, Mayor Sterling instantly regained a shred of her manufactured confidence. It was as if the presence of institutional authority, police in uniforms, badges visible, the machinery of law enforcement now officially engaged, had restored her sense of control. She straightened her posture. She jutted her chin in the air. She looked at the lad officer with the expression of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Officers," she commanded, pointing fiercely at Marcus. "Arrest this janitor immediately. He has stolen charity funds from this gala. He has access to the vault through his maintenance keys. He is a thief. The lead officer nodded, his face neutral and professional. He didn't question the accusation. He didn't ask for evidence. The mayor was clearly a person of authority. Her gown, her jewelry, her position at the center of the room all conveyed status, and the accusation had come with an audience of witnesses who had just watched a public confrontation. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his duty belt. The tension in the room spiked to a suffocating high. The live broadcast captured a deeply enraging image. A lone, calm, black, working-class man surrounded by armed police officers, about to be arrested and removed from the ballroom based solely on the word of a corrupt politician. The visual was undeniable. The power imbalance now institutionalized, formalized, about to be physically enacted in front of millions of viewers. The crowd held its breath, wondering if the mayor's power was actually going to win out over the truth, wondering if institutional authority, the police, the badges, the system itself, would side with wealth and status over evidence, wondering if Marcus would actually be arrested on live television. The lead officer reached for Marcus's wrist. Marcus didn't resist, but he didn't offer his hands either. He held his ground, his feet planted firmly on the polished marble floor. His composure never wavered. There was no panic in his face, no anger, no fear. He looked the lead officer dead in the eye. "Before you put those on," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of someone accustomed to being heard, "you need to check the maintenance corridor behind the main vault. I'll take you there." He offered no further explanation. He didn't tell them who he was. He didn't explain how he knew what was hidden in that corridor. He didn't defend himself or plead his case. He simply gave a directive, calm, clear, undeniable, that the police felt inexplicably compelled to follow. The lead officer hesitated. For a moment, he looked between Sterling and Marcus, trying to process the shift in energy. Something in Marcus's tone had changed the dynamic, not through aggression or desperation, but through absolute certainty. The officer's training kicked in, a witness to a crime offering to show evidence, a potential breakthrough, the logical next step. He lowered the handcuffs slightly. "Show us," he said. Behind the officers, Mayor Sterling's face went completely pale. The blood drained from her skin, leaving her looking almost ghost-like in the bright lights. She knew exactly what was in that corridor. She knew exactly what Marcus was about to reveal. Without breaking eye contact with the police, Marcus reached down to his belt. With a sharp metallic click, he detached a single small silver key from his worn brass ring, a key separate from his janitor's keys, a key that had a very specific purpose. The trap was set, and Mayor Sterling knew it. The procession that formed in the next moment would be replayed for weeks on news broadcasts, analyzed in think tanks, and discussed in classrooms across the country. Marcus led the way, his heavy work boots thudding with rhythmic, mechanical precision against the polished marble floor. The sound was steady, unhurried, almost meditative. The footsteps of someone who knew exactly where he was going and why. Behind him followed the 4 uniformed police officers, their hands resting on their duty belts, their radios crackling with updates to dispatch. They had been called to make an arrest. Now they were following a janitor into the administrative corridors of City Hall, uncertain what they would find. Behind them came Mayor Sterling, no longer commanding the room, but flanked by officers on either side. Her elegant black gown swept across the marble as she stumbled forward, her heels clicking irregularly. The sound of a woman who had lost her footing, both literally and figuratively. The TV camera boom trailed them like a predatory bird, hovering overhead, capturing every moment. This was no longer a local news story about a charity gala. This was a live broadcast of institutional collapse, watched in real time by millions. The only sounds in the long, opulent hallway were the whir of the camera lens, the steady thud of Marcus's boots, the irregular clicking of Sterling's heels, and the mayor's frantic, ragged whispering. "It's a trick," she hissed, her voice cracking. "He's leading you into a trap. Officers, don't listen to him. He's just a janitor. He's desperate." Marcus didn't turn around. He didn't respond. He didn't defend himself or engage with her accusations. He simply kept walking, letting the silence and the cold hallway do the work for him, allowing the mayor's own panic to strip away the last of her dignity. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, marble and brass and portraits of city officials hanging on walls that had witnessed power and corruption for decades. But Marcus knew exactly where he was going. He had walked these corridors alone at night for weeks, documenting, observing, waiting for this exact moment. When they reached the maintenance section, the architecture changed. The polished marble gave way to cinder block. The expensive lighting gave way to utilitarian fixtures. They had left the world of elite performance and entered the world of necessary labor. The spaces where people like Marcus worked, unseen and unnoticed. Marcus stopped at a nondescript, rusted maintenance grate set into the cinder block wall. Marcus knelt in front of the maintenance grate. The police officers leaned in, their professional curiosity now fully engaged. The cameras pushed closer. Mayor Sterling's whispering stopped. There was only the sound of Marcus's breathing and the faint scrape of metal as he pulled a small key ring from his pocket. Not the worn brass ring of janitor's keys, but a separate set, kept intentionally apart. He selected a single silver key from the set. The lock was heavy, industrial grade, the kind meant to protect valuable equipment. Marcus inserted the key with deliberate slowness, making sure the cameras caught the action. He turned it. The lock resisted, for a moment, then gave way, with a metallic click that echoed through the hallway. With a groan of protest, the grate swung open. Marcus reached into the dark recess behind the vent and hauled out a heavy black nylon duffel bag. It was thick, substantial, clearly containing significant weight. He set it on the concrete floor in front of the police officers and the cameras. Then he pulled the zipper back in one long, deliberate motion. Inside, the proof was undeniable. Banded stacks of $100 bills were piled high, neatly organized, clearly cataloged. The cash alone would have been stunning, but the cash was not the real story. The lead officer reached in, his hand moving carefully. He pulled out a thick folder of documents. Offshore wire transfer receipts, bank statements from accounts registered in shell companies, detailed records of systematic embezzlement spanning years. Each document bore the same signature: Mayor Evelyn Sterling. The officer's face went completely still. He pulled out more documents. Internal memos referencing transfers and delayed presentations, handwritten notes in Sterling's handwriting, discussing timing and amounts, and beneath it all, a burner phone, a cheap, disposable device used to communicate with unknown recipients about money movements that had never appeared in official city budgets. The lead officer looked at the cash, at the documents, at the burner phone, then at Mayor Sterling. "Oh my God," he whispered. The other officers stepped forward, their professional detachment replaced by visible shock. This was not a simple theft. This was systematic corruption laid bare in a duffel bag behind a maintenance grate, documented, preserved, and now exposed on live television. The TV camera captured it all: the cash, the receipts, Sterling's signature in bold ink, the burner phone, and the moment when the police officers realized they were not there to arrest a janitor. They were there to arrest a mayor. Mayor Sterling's skin had gone completely gray. She swayed slightly, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the cinder block wall. The weight of the evidence was physical, crushing, undeniable. The broadcast was still rolling. Millions of people were watching. There was no explaining this away. The lead officer's hand trembled slightly as he held the offshore wire transfer receipts. He looked at Marcus, then back at the documents, then at the duffel bag of cash, then at Mayor Sterling. The pieces were connecting, but there was still one missing element. The thing he needed to understand. "How did you know?" the officer asked, his voice quiet. Marcus stood calmly, his worn ring of keys still hanging at his hip. For the first time since they had entered the maintenance corridor, he spoke. "I've been documenting this for 3 weeks," Marcus said, his voice steady and factual. Late-night vault access. Transfers that didn't match the official records. Discrepancies in the audit trail. I kept copies of everything I could access through the maintenance systems. Security logs, access records, surveillance notes. 3 weeks ago, I called the FBI tip line and started sending them digital copies of what I'd found. The officer's eyes widened. "You're the anonymous source? The one our field office has been working with?" "Yes," Marcus said simply. He gestured toward the duffel bag. "We knew Sterling was embezzling. What we didn't know was when she'd move the physical cash. She kept it hidden, rotated it between accounts, always careful about the timing. But we knew tonight was the gala. We knew the broadcast would pressure her. We knew if she panicked, she'd move the money to get it out of the city before any investigation went public." The officer looked at the burner phone, understanding the full scope now. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a lucky discovery. This was a meticulous, patient investigation that had been waiting for the exact moment when pressure would force Sterling to act. "You set a trap," the officer said. "I provided the evidence," Marcus corrected quietly. "She walked into it of her own accord." Behind them, Sterling made a sound, something between a gasp and a moan. She was still pressed against the cinder block wall, her elegant black gown now looking like the costume it had always been. The officer turned to his partner. "Get her into custody. Read her rights." As the handcuffs clicked shut around Sterling's wrists on live television, as she was led away, stumbling down the maintenance corridor, as the broadcast continued rolling and recording and transmitting the image of a sitting mayor being arrested for systematic corruption, Marcus simply watched. His face remained composed, his breathing remained steady. He had done what needed to be done. The walk back through the ballroom was a moment frozen in time. The procession that had entered the administrative corridors just minutes before now emerged transformed. The police officers no longer looked uncertain. They looked focused, professional, grimly determined. Mayor Sterling was no longer commanding them. She was in custody, her hands cuffed behind her back, her designer gown torn and stained. And Marcus walked behind them, his keys jingling softly with each step. As the group moved through the grand ballroom doors, the music stopped abruptly. The orchestra's conductor had clearly received a signal: cut the music, cut the ceremony, cut the pretense. This was no longer an event to be orchestrated. This was a crime scene. The wealthy donors stood frozen as the procession passed through their midst. Several donors gasped audibly. Others pulled out their phones to record the final moment. The mayor being led away in handcuffs on live television, captured from multiple angles, about to be shared across social media within seconds. Some donors looked away, unable to meet Sterling's eyes. Others stared with an almost clinical detachment, watching their peer, their social equal, collapse into criminal accountability in real time. As Marcus followed the police and the arrested mayor through the ballroom, the crowd instinctively parted. Not in fear this time, in shame. The donors who had whispered harsh judgments about Marcus now stood silent, understanding the scope of what had just happened. They had been complicit in the false accusation. They had believed the mayor without evidence. They had judged the invisible worker and sided with the powerful woman. And they had been catastrophically wrong. Marcus walked through the center of the ballroom, past the donors who would not meet his eyes, past the catering staff who had been told to serve the powerful without question, past the security guards who had flanked him in arrest moments before. The rhythmic jingle of his keys was the only sound accompanying the procession. The sound of a man who had never needed vindication, because the truth had always been on his side. For the first time all evening, the room was completely, absolutely silent. By the time Marcus reached the entrance of the ballroom, the chief of police had already arrived. The man moved with the kind of authority that comes from genuine institutional power, not the performative kind that Mayor Sterling had relied on. He was flanked by federal agents. The FBI field office had mobilized the moment the arrest began. This was no longer just a city matter. This was federal corruption, federal crimes, federal jurisdiction. The chief walked directly past Mayor Sterling without a glance. She was being processed by uniformed officers, her rights being read, her dignity being stripped away in exactly the same manner she had attempted to strip Marcus's moments before. The chief's eyes fixed on Marcus. He walked toward him with his hand extended, moving with deliberate visibility so that the TV cameras would capture the gesture clearly. This was a public acknowledgement, a formal recognition, an institutional validation. "Mr. Marcus," the chief said, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom, "I want to personally thank you. You've just saved this city from decades of institutional theft. Your documentation, your patience, your evidence. You've given us what we need to dismantle a corruption scheme that goes deeper than just Mayor Sterling." Marcus shook his hand, a firm grip, professional, composed. "There will be a formal commendation," the chief continued. "And the FBI would like to speak with you about your methodology. You've demonstrated extraordinary investigative instinct." The TV reporter, realizing this was the narrative climax, moved in with a microphone. The camera swung toward Marcus. "Marcus, how did you stay so calm when she was calling you a thief in front of the world?" the reporter asked, her voice trembling slightly with the adrenaline of the breaking story. Marcus looked directly into the camera lens. His face was serene, completely untroubled. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute clarity. "The truth doesn't need to shout," he said simply. "It just needs to be held onto." The news cycle was relentless, and it was merciless. For 3 weeks, every local station ran the footage on repeat. The moment Mayor Sterling's smile slipped, the accusation on live TV, Marcus's calm question about the biometric log, the mayor's panicked lunges, the police arrival, the walk down the maintenance corridor, the duffel bag opened, the cash, the receipts bearing her signature. And then the sentencing. The heavy gold mayor's necklace that had been such as a visible symbol of her authority was removed and placed into a clear evidence bag. It sat on the prosecutor's table during the trial, a gleaming artifact of power that had become a symbol of corruption. In its place, around Sterling's neck in the federal courtroom, was a rough cotton collar. An orange jumpsuit replaced the elegant black evening gown, her carefully maintained appearance. The salon-quality hair, the designer makeup, the curated image of power gave way to the institutional uniformity of federal custody. The judge's sentencing was televised, broadcast to the same millions who had watched her collapse on live television. "You stole millions from the city's most vulnerable children," the judge declared, his voice carrying the weight of institutional judgment. "Funds meant for underfunded schools, for students with the fewest resources, for communities you were elected to serve. You didn't just embezzle money. You weaponized your position. You attempted to frame an innocent man to cover your crimes. You will serve 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel came down, final, irreversible, permanent. Mayor Sterling's political career was erased. Her reputation was destroyed. Her freedom was taken. The woman who had stood at a podium commanding a ballroom full of wealthy donors was now a federal inmate, her name synonymous with corruption and betrayal. She had tried to make Marcus invisible. Now, she was the one the world wanted to forget. The stolen millions were recovered. Through the offshore accounts, through the shell companies, through the meticulous documentation that Marcus had gathered, federal investigators traced every penny. The money that had been diverted from public schools. The funds that had been hidden in accounts registered under false names. The cash that Sterling had kept in maintenance corridors and private safe houses. It was all recovered. And it went exactly where it should have gone in the first place. The following Monday, a week after Sterling's sentencing, Marcus stood on the stage of the city's largest public high school gymnasium. The space was packed with students, teachers, administrators, and local media. The principal stood at the microphone, beaming with a joy that seemed to transform her entire face. "Thanks to the courage of one man," the principal announced, her voice carrying through the gymnasium. "We are announcing the return of $8.7 million in recovered school funding. This money will go directly into classroom resources, library expansion, technology upgrades, and scholarship support for students who have been waiting for these opportunities for years." The students erupted in cheers. As Marcus walked through the gymnasium, past the bleachers filled with young people whose educational futures had just been materially transformed. The students and teachers rose to their feet in a deafening roar of applause. It was not polite applause. It was full-bodied, emotional, genuine gratitude. A young student, maybe 14 with braids and intelligent eyes, reached out and touched his shoulder as he passed. "Thank you," she mouthed silently, tears visible on her cheeks. Marcus nodded, his composure maintained, even in the face of genuine human gratitude. Marcus returned to the school where he worked as a janitor. The boiler room hummed with the same familiar rhythm it always had. The pipes rattled with the sound of hot water flowing through the building's infrastructure. The maintenance closet smelled of floor wax and industrial cleaner, the ordinary, necessary smells of the work that kept the institution functioning. But everything had changed. Teachers who had never acknowledged him before now greeted him by name in the hallways. Students stopped to thank him. The principal had designated a reserved parking spot for him, a small gesture, but one that signified respect. The school board had voted unanimously to create a permanent scholarship in his name, funded by a portion of the recovered money. Marcus hung his work coat on the same hook where it had hung for 9 years. The routine was unchanged. The work was unchanged. But the invisible labor had become visible, and visibility had brought recognition. Marcus picked up his broom. He stepped back out into the hallway of the school, the same hallway he had swept for 9 years. The floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Students passed by, some nodding in acknowledgement, some offering quiet greetings. The institutional machinery of education continued around him, unchanged and essential. He hadn't done it for the cameras. He hadn't done it for the news cycles or the public vindication or the scholarships or the commendations. He hadn't done it to become visible or to receive recognition, or to transform status from invisible labor to celebrated whistleblower. He had done it because the truth was the only thing worth holding on to. Because corruption in institutions meant stolen futures for students who had nothing else. Because bias and abuse, when left unchecked, became normalized. Because the person society trained itself to ignore. The janitor, the service worker, the invisible laborer, often saw the most clearly exactly because no one was watching them watch. The broom moved across the floor in steady, practiced strokes, back and forth, forward and back. The same rhythm Marcus had maintained for 9 years, the same rhythm he would maintain for years to come. The work was honest. The work was necessary. The work was his. Mayor Sterling was in federal prison, serving a 20-year sentence. The stolen funds were rebuilding the city's schools. Students who had been waiting for resources now had them, and Marcus had returned to the quiet, steady work of maintaining the institution that had once been willing to believe he was a thief. He didn't need anyone to see him do this